Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful, creepy human being you, and welcome to today's true crime episode. I'm so happy that you are here. I am so happy that somehow in all of this that we're forced to deal with on the day today, you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing the murder of 9-year-old Matthew Cecchi. Matthew, his mother, and his little brother were trying to have a carefree night at the beach during essentially a family reunion, and everything was going great. The kids were running around playing, the adults were sitting around talking, everybody was happy to see each other, and then in moments everything changed because 9-year-old Matthew Cecchi went to go into the bathroom, but he never came out again. And what happened in that bathroom is something that shocked this area to its core. I can't even explain or properly express just how shocked people were with what happened. And it's the type of thing that anybody who knows about it, this still haunts them to this day. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. Now, before we get into the details of today's case, I first need to say a big thank you to the sponsor of today's video, and that is ZocDoc. And I love ZocDoc specifically because the older I've gotten, the longer I've been on this planet, the more I've realized just how your health really is the most valuable asset that you have. Things can change so quickly, sometimes overnight, and you would not know what's going on within yourself if you weren't on top of it. I've come to realize just how important it is to take care of yourself and to stay proactive and to be comfortable with the type of care that you are getting, and ZocDoc can really help with that. ZocDoc is a free website that lets you find and book doctors of many types, pretty much any type that you can think of, from mental health to dental health, which are two things that are very, very important. We're talking about in-network appointments with more than 100,000 healthcare providers that cover pretty much every specialty you can think of, from, again, mental health to dental health to also eye care, skin care, and so much more. And these doctors are verified by actual patients. They're in your area. They take your insurance. And most importantly, they're available when you actually need them. And best of all, it's super easy. Okay, you can use the website to filter through doctors that fit your criteria and book your appointment instantly. So you don't have to deal with any of that phone call anxiety that I know some of us feel. And by some of us, I mean specifically me. Maybe you too, but definitely me. And not only is booking through ZocDoc easy, it's super fast too. The typical turnaround time to get an appointment is 24 to 72 hours, but sometimes you can even get same-day appointments. When I was pregnant, I just learned firsthand how important it is to take care of yourself, and not just when something's wrong, but to be proactive and also to be comfortable with the care that you are getting. And comfortability, convenience, and reliability weren't words that I previously associated with healthcare, but with ZocDoc, you really can. So if all this sounds as good to you as it does to me and you want to try ZocDoc out for yourself, make sure to click the link in my description box. It lets them know I sent you. It's ZocDoc.com/Bratterstein to find and book a top-rated doctor today. Now I just want to say a big thank you to ZocDoc for partnering with me on today's video. It's partners like ZocDoc that make it possible for me to put out videos as consistently as I do. And a big thank you to you guys for always being so supportive of all of my sponsors. You rock, don't ever change. Now, with all that said, today I'm going to tell you the story of the murder of Matthew Cecchi. I read all the things that you do not have to. And at the end of this video, I want you to answer the question of the day. I'm going to give it to you now so you can have it kicking on in your brain as we go through the details of this case. But of course, I want you to answer once you have something to go on, okay? And the question of the day is this. Do you believe that the person who killed Matthew was mentally ill to the point that they shouldn't have been held legally responsible? Or do you think that they should have been given the death penalty? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below because I am curious to hear what you have to say. And now with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of the murder of Matthew Cecchi. So Matthew Cecchi. Matthew was just 9 years old, an actual baby, and he was the older brother to a 3-year-old little brother named Nicky, who absolutely loved him, adored him, and called him his hero. And both of the boys were born to their parents. This was Louis and Sharon. At the time that he was killed, he and his family lived in Oroville, California. They had previously lived in Anaheim, but big cities come with big problems. So they wanted a simpler, safer, slower paced life away from the crime, congestion, and pollution of the big city. So Oroville just seemed like a great place for that. This was a place that was filled with history. It was an area that was super important during the gold rush, but also culture. There were like several museums. But in addition to all of that, it was also super good for outdoorsy people because it was filled with lakes and hiking trails, which I don't know about you, but that's something that I personally fuck with heavily. Oroville sounds like, and from all the photos I see of it, it looks to be a very pretty place, which makes sense to me in my experience because I don't know about you, but I have found, if you've been to California, that the farther north you drive, the prettier it gets. And Oroville was significantly farther north than Anaheim, which is where they initially lived. And yeah, in my experience, when I made the drive, because I once drove, I didn't drive, I passenger princess over here from Los Angeles to Portland, Oregon. And literally the farther north you get, the more beautiful it gets. But that also is dependent on like your preferences and what you find to be beautiful. Because I know there are some people out there that find Los Angeles to be a beautiful place. But for me, I've always been like a Pacific Northwest kind of girl. But anyways, this is where they were living. This is where Matthew was living. And Matthew was said to be just a good kid, the type of kid who had like a dynamic personality to the point that he just demanded your attention, but in a good way. He was seen as a sweet child. He was said to be very impressive. He was a type of kid where if you knew him, you loved him. It was really just that simple. He was super smart. He was an A student. He was, quote, extraordinarily honest, and he was said to be incredibly inquisitive about God. Matthew was a student at Stanford Avenue Elementary School, where he was said to be a very good student. He excelled at both academics and sports. Apparently, even at his young age, he had made a name for himself. Like, he played baseball, right? Again, sports. And he was the first player of his age to get a home run. He literally smacked that ball completely out of the park. And he was said to be so excited about getting this home run that when he was running around the bases, he almost ran like past where you're supposed to go. His mother said that he really loved baseball, but it wasn't all that he loved. He also really loved riding his bike. He wanted to grow up to either be a cartoonist, a engineer, or an architect, which all seemed like such big dreams for such a little guy, but he did have such a big personality within him. And in addition to those three things, he also would have had a flourishing career as a writer, if that's something he wanted to do, because he was said to be very, very into writing short stories. And specifically, he loved to write short stories about aliens. Matthew was very close with his family. I mean, he was 9 years old. What 9-year-old is not close with their family? But he was said to have a really good, sweet relationship with his dad. He was, the first boy, and him and his dad would often go fishing together in a pond that was on his grandpa's property. And sometimes, grandpa would join in the fun, and the group would like pitch a tent, and they would tell jokes and tell stories about deer and bears and beavers. And this is something that Matthew was said to just simply love. Like, that quality time was very valuable to him. His grandmother said that he was just a 9-year-old boy, a little boy who loved playing Legos and would often put together these intricate building things with Legos. You know what I'm talking about? He would do really intricate ones, and he loved to play Monopoly after school, and he was just said to be a kid that was always smiling. And she said specifically of him, and I quote, "He was a great kid, a pleasant, well-rounded boy with aspirations and potential beyond belief." So in November of 1998, Matthew and his family were going to be taking a very long-awaited road trip. Well, it wasn't like the whole family. It was Matthew, his little brother Nicky, and his mother Sharon. Lewis wasn't going to be joining them because actually this was the father. He ended up being diagnosed with leukemia, which, if you don't know, it's a type of cancer. And so he was going to stay home and he was going to rest, which seems like in that situation, without hindsight, that would be the move, because like, can you imagine driving like an extended road trip while you're not feeling super great with two kids? It sounds like an actual nightmare. But this was something that the family really still wanted to do. They hadn't seen the family. Like, they were going to be driving to Oceanside, California, which isn't super close to Anaheim, but it's a lot closer than Oroville, right? And they were going to be driving there to see a bunch of extended family that they hadn't seen since they moved to Oroville. Now, everybody was so excited, and the family arrived in Oceanside, California on November 14th, 1998. And I don't think I've mentioned this on this channel before, but Oceanside, California is actually a place that has a very near and dear spot in my heart. Oceanside is a beach city that's near San Diego, and it is beautiful. It's a beautiful area. It's a typical beach city, right? It's filled with vibrant people and art and culture and a lot of creativity and like hot tan people surfing and like weirdos, but in a good way. People walking cats and iguanas on leashes. It's that kind of place. And if you're into a man in uniform, the military, Marine specifically, Camp Pendleton is right there. So there are lots of like buff dudes, buff servicemen walking around too, if that's your thing. It's just a very cool place, and it's a place that I often spent my summers when I was a kid and mostly when I was a teenager, because my aunt who lived there at the time had a very much like my casa, su casas type of situation there. So me and all of my like weirdo teenage asshole friends would go and stay at her house, and we'd spend the night there. And if her house was too full, because like it really was, she had a very full life. She's still alive. She has, excuse me, a very full life. We would just like sleep out in the car, or we would pull all-nighters. We just like wanted to be there. Most people did. So this is where Matthew and his family was. They were going to be meeting a bunch of family members, and we're going to actually be camping at a campsite at the Oceanside Harbor, which is wild to me because as many times as I was there, I didn't even know that they had camping, but they did. So he and his mom and his family were going to be staying in an RV at the campsite, and there were going to be other family members staying there as well, so that, you know, Matthew and his brother would have the opportunity to run around and play with other kids his age, other cousins, and create some core memories. And so they did. They ran, they played, the sun went down. There was like a jungle gym area where the kids could still play while the adults sat around the campfire and just finally got some time to sit down and talk to each other again in person when they hadn't in so long. And everything was just so great. Then it was about 9 p.m. when Matthew said he needed to go to the bathroom. The bathrooms were super close to where they were, so Matthew could have walked over himself, but it was dark and he was so small. He's so young. He's 9 years old. So his Aunt Gail offered to walk him over to the bathroom. And I guess typically he would actually go into the woman's restroom with like his mom. But in this instance, he asked if he could use the boys' bathroom instead because that's what he wanted to do. So Matthew and his aunt walk to the bathrooms, and Matthew goes in by himself to the boys' bathroom while his Aunt Gail waits just right outside. A couple of seconds after Matthew went into the bathroom, a teenage boy followed in behind him. And this is a teenage boy who didn't have anything about him that would make him notable to Aunt Gail. She didn't think anything of him. Like, why would she? It's just a teenage boy going to the bathroom. And a minute or so after the boy went into the bathroom, though, Aunt Gail heard some noises coming from within the bathroom, like kind of like a gargling sound. So when she heard these noises, she was kind of like, what the fuck? Like, what am I hearing? But before she even had like an opportunity to react or realize what was going on, the teenage boy was leaving, and he seemed kind of agitated, and he was muttering to himself, and he was saying there was one thing he said that was legible, and something that in hindsight is incredibly chilly because we know where this is going, right? And when he left the bathroom, he said something along the lines, like quietly to himself, of like, I could have done the same thing to you too. Okay, so he says this, and then he just kind of runs off into the night. I picture like the kids from Weapons, him just like running off, like he's got a little like a seeking missile kind of situation. Just runs off into the beach and disappears. Not like into the water, but you know, onto the beach, disappears with people. He's gone. Now, though, in hindsight, knowing what we now know and knowing what she now knows, this is a very weird situation. At the time, it didn't feel as weird as it was, and she didn't think much of this guy just going in the bathroom and running off. And she figured that Matt was still going to the bathroom, like he hadn't been in there very long. So she stood outside and she waited. And she waited. And she waited. And then she started to worry because she's like, okay, what is taking this 9-year-old so long to go to the bathroom? Even if he's going, you know, number 2, it's not going to take this long. So she decides to go into the bathroom. And when she does, she sees something that nobody should ever have to see. She walks into an actual nightmare. And when Gail saw what she saw in that bathroom, she started to scream. And there was a man who had been parked in his vehicle near the bathrooms. And he's sitting in there and he hears the screams coming from the bathroom. So he immediately is like, oh shit, what's going on? And decides he's going to be a good Samaritan and he's going to go and help. So he runs to these bathrooms. And when he goes inside, he finds Gail sitting on the ground, holding Matthew, attempting to perform CPR. But it's no good because at this point, Matt's throat had been cut. This man panicked upon seeing this. He took off his shirt immediately and helped put it over Matt's neck to try to stop the bleeding, but it wasn't looking good. And Gail was able to dial 911. She called 911 and she told the operator, she was like screaming, she was hysterical, and she said that somebody had attacked her little nephew, that he was bleeding everywhere, and that he had a cut to his throat. So police and paramedics rush to the scene, right? They get the call, they rush to the scene. And at this point, Matt's family sees the lights and the paramedics and the commotion and realizes that something's going on, because prior to this, it's not like Aunt Gail could have really like ran over and gave a status report. She was in the trenches trying to save her nephew's life. So they didn't even know what was going on. But they see the lights, they see the commotion, and one of Matthew's other aunts, this was a woman named Roberta, decides she's going to just go over and see what's going on. They don't think it's related to Matt. They're just like, what's going on? And wanting to be like a little nosy, right? They want to know what's going on. So she walks over and she goes into the bathroom, and that's when she sees what I've been describing to you. And she said that just like nothing could prepare you for seeing something like this. And what's so sad here is that after Roberta went in the bathroom and she saw what she saw, Sharon followed her in, Matthew's mom. So she goes in this bathroom and she finds her baby, her firstborn son, on this dirty bathroom floor with this like gray jacket pulled up to his neck, and he's just like surrounded in blood. It's all over the floor, it's all over the walls, and you can tell by looking at him that it's not good. So she just drops to her knees, she's crying hysterically. She starts rubbing his head and rubbing his hair and talking to him and saying like Matthew, it's mommy, I love you so much, just hold on. And she said that like this boy was the light of her life, and said that her life has been nothing since she lost him. And dude, imagine being Lewis. Imagine being Lewis, who stayed home, and you're at home and you're sick and you have cancer, and then you get a call from a family member, I believe it was one of the uncles, letting you know that your child is dead. He was so upset. That doesn't even, like, you can't even put it into words. He didn't want the kids to go on this trip, I guess. So in learning this, it was just so devastating, and everybody was in shock. They could not believe that this could happen. And Lewis said of his son, quote, "He was my best friend. He actually was my best friend." Now, people were shocked to hear what happened, because this, again, was an area that was very popular. It was not at all unusual for you to just let your kids go off to the beach and dick around on the pier for an entire day, an entire afternoon, without knowing where they were. This was a totally normal thing. In a lot of beach cities, I think it's still a totally normal thing to do. So this was incredibly shocking, and it kind of just shook up people's sense of safety, really, their sense of ease, and the idea that the world wasn't a safe place was now implanted in people's brains, that even this place could be a dangerous place. Because think about it, this was such a shocking crime, and it was something that generally did not happen here. This was the random and spontaneous murder of a little kid for absolutely no reason. So people were very reluctant, like locals were very reluctant to just let their kids go off to the beach after this. The bathroom where Matthew was killed became a memorial for him, and it became covered with balloons and stuffed animals and candles and notes, and it was a place where people could go and remember Matthew and show respect and support to his family. His mother was moved by this. She said that she had seen the memorial and she couldn't believe that there were so many strangers out there who seemed to care so much about her son. She said she was particularly moved by one specific drawing that was there, because it was a drawing that was clearly made by a child, and it had like a bunch of angels, and it said on it that now Matthew was one of their angels. And that seemed to really resonate with her, because she said that the only thing that she could grasp onto during this hellish experience was the knowledge that her son was now with God, and that he was able to watch over her and her husband and her son, his little brother. Which truly, what else could you grasp onto in this sort of situation? This was such a violent crime on such a little boy, dude. Like, the sergeant of the police was like, we can't find any rhyme or reason as to why this happened. It's completely random, and it had everybody shocked and scared. And of course they were, dude. This person was still out there, and the police were worried that people would be too afraid to go into public restrooms without being armed. And of course they wanted people to defend themselves, or to feel safe, basically. They wanted people to feel safe, but they didn't want people to feel like every single person who went into a public bathroom was automatically in danger. They figured this was an isolated incident, so there was no reason to worry, which I will be honest, to me, that's kind of a wild take, because even if this was, because first off, you don't know this is an isolated incident, okay? These people weren't from this area. It's not like somebody targeted this little boy who knew this little boy. This was a random person who could randomly murder somebody and didn't even have it within them to not randomly murder a child. You know what I mean? Like, that's a special kind of person, and by special, I mean a fucking demon piece of shit type of person who could hurt a kid. So from my position, it does seem like everybody could be in danger, but I'm not trying to keep, tourism coming through to the beach cities. This is like Jaws. Keep the beaches open. Everything's fine. When I first started researching this case and I realized that it was local and I saw the year, I actually texted my aunt because she and my family did live there for decades. They don't live there now, but they lived there for decades. And I asked her if she remembered this happening. And she immediately said yes. Not only did she remember it happening, she was actually at the harbor, on the harbor that night, but on the other end. So they heard about it happening. They were actually there when it happened. And she said that because of this case, it made it so that the grandkids, there's a bunch of kids, very big family, were not allowed to go to the bathrooms by themselves for the longest time. And before that they were. And it was this case that changed their everyday and how they conducted themselves. And truly, that's how these cases go. It's not just the person you kill. It's not even just the family of the person you kill. It's affected. These things have widespread consequences and effects on people's lives. I mean, my family, who had no connection whatsoever to this, changed their routines because of what happened to Matthew. Matthew's funeral was held at St. Thomas the Apostle Catholic Church, and hundreds of people attended his funeral. There were so many people there that some of them had to stand out in the hall because the church actually hit capacity. And it was filled with those who knew him and loved him, friends and family, and some people who had never even met him. It was an incredibly emotional service, as I'm sure you can imagine. There were many people in tears, and Matthew's Aunt Gail, the one who actually found his body, ended up becoming so overcome with emotion that she had to actually physically be escorted out of the church. And Father Troy, the one who, conducted the service, said of what happened to Matthew, and I quote, "Nothing we do today can help us make sense of this tragedy. Nothing Matt experienced 10 days ago can destroy the bond of love you shared with him." And dude, oh my gosh, not during the service. Well, it was still during the service, but towards the end of the service, okay? A bunch of his classmates got up on the front, and they sang a song for Matt, and they sang "You Are My Sunshine." Can you even imagine that? More than a dozen little kids, and they're all there singing this song to him. And then at the end of the song, the last line, they changed it. They made it a parody to make it more personal to Matt. And they sang, quote, "You'll always know, Matt, how much we love you. In our heart, your light still shines." And Matt's teacher said that he truly was a ray of sunshine. So obviously this case was a huge deal, and police felt the pressure to figure out who did this as quickly as possible. I mean, the idea that a teenager could walk into a bathroom and murder a child on a public beach was horrifying. So immediately upon discovering the murder scene, we're going back a little bit. Upon discovering the murder scene, police were on it. Okay, they were on top of trying to get this solved. The Oceanside Harbor was closed down, it was taped off, and police started canvassing and questioning every single person that they came in contact with. And they went into all of the nearby establishments, the open stores, the restaurants, even hotels. Any place that somebody could have gone into that may have seen something or may have seen somebody. And a bunch of volunteers came and scoured the beach with metal detectors to try to locate the murder weapon, because they figured it was possible that somebody might have tried to dump it. So the person that people were looking for was who Aunt Gail said she thought she saw, or who she did see. And she thought she saw a teenager. She said she believed he was between the ages of 15 and 17. He was wearing jeans and a dark t-shirt. So when police are going around asking people if they saw him, this is who they're looking for. But the problem here is this is a beach city. This is a beach city on a Saturday night, okay? There are people and teenagers everywhere. It's nighttime, so there's less than in the day, but it's still a Saturday. So there are people everywhere. Everyone saw somebody, so it's just a question of whether or not they saw him specifically. And unfortunately, that was a question that really wasn't getting any substantial answers. When they were questioning people on the beach, they weren't really getting answers that they could use to identify who killed Matt. The break in this case that was going to help police answer the question of who killed 9-year-old Matthew Cecchi did not come from the beaches of Oceanside, California, but instead came from a place that nobody expected. It was 2 hours and about 100 miles away in Hollywood, California. Okay, so at 6:30 in the morning, I believe this is the day after the murder took place, and a 40-year-old woman named Maria Rosales had left her home, likely headed to work, when a young man tried to rob her of her purse, tried to steal her purse at knife point. Now, she's walking, she feels him grab her purse, she turns, she looks at him, she sees the knife, and she takes off running, okay? And instead of homeboy here cutting his losses and realizing that, he wasn't getting this particular purse, he chased her. He pursued her on foot, which is an actual nightmare. This guy caught up to her and proceeded to attack her. He proceeded to stab her. He stabbed her in her abdomen, her chest, and even her head, bro, before trying to take off running. Now, this is Hollywood, okay? This is another place where people are everywhere. So people were out on the street and people saw what happened to her and came to her aid. And not even just that. A couple of dudes that saw what he did and saw that he tried to run took off after him. Okay, they pursued him. They caught him. They tackled him. They took his belt and restrained him, and they held him there until police could come and take him and the paramedics could come and help her. And these four men, there were four dudes that went and chased him down and tackled him, where they ended up being honored for their bravery by the city, because they could have done nothing. They didn't have to chase after this guy. That's not their job, but they took it upon themselves to do that. And honestly, though, I mean, LA doesn't play it. Hollywood, LA, all about the same thing. Hollywood's a little bit, but LA County doesn't play, because if you remember Richard Ramirez, he was messing around in LA, and as soon as people in LA found out that he was the Night Stalker and his face is on those magazines, they mobbed his ass down and beat the fuck out of him. They don't mess around. And Matthew's family, they did hear about these four men who chased this guy down and tackled him, and ended up making it so that he was brought into custody. And they, or specifically his father, said how grateful they were for how brave these dudes were. So cops got there. They took this man that was in Hollywood who attacked this woman, into custody, thinking that they just got a guy who had attacked a woman randomly, which unfortunately is not an uncommon thing to happen, but this was going to be an uncommon case for them for sure. But this guy that they took into custody was a 20-year-old guy named Brandon Wilson. So Brandon was born in Wisconsin, and he was born to his parents his father Robert and his mother Sharon, which is coincidental that his mother's name is Sharon and Matthew's mother's name is also Sharon. I don't really have anything to do with that except for just file it away in my brain as a coincidence. But Brandon, his parents were said to be overall good parents. From the outside, the family seemed good. Brandon was said to be a good kid. He was a smart kid who got good grades. He even went on to make the National Honor Society, and he was in the top 25% of his class and had big dreams to go to college and just make something of his life. So things were good. Things were really good in his life about until the time where Brandon became a teenager, because first something changed in his life, and then Brandon himself seemed to completely change. Brandon's little league coach and high school math teacher, this was a guy named Michael. He said that Brandon was one of the brightest students he had, but said that his grades started to dip about his sophomore year. He said that he knew that Brandon's family was going through it. His parents were going through a bitter breakup, and he could just tell that what was going on in his family dynamic was really bleeding into his academics and his personality overall. So why things changed for him specifically, why he changed so much as a person, is up for debate. There are people who think it has to do with the divorce, because a divorce happening at such a formative year can be disruptive for sure. But there are plenty of people who come from divorced households who don't go on to do what Brandon went on to do. But when it came to him, it did seem to affect him. This is when the problems started to happen. The once bright overachiever seemed disinterested, disengaged. He stopped trying as hard at school. His grades started to dip, and within no time, he started dabbling in drugs, including hallucinogens. He later said that doing those drugs was a way for him to sort of visit himself, see who he really was, and figure out what it really meant to be him, what the world had planned for him, essentially. And, I have heard of this sort of thing. I have heard of people using hallucinogens in this sort of therapeutic way. But in this particular case, it seems that perhaps Brandon wasn't the most ideal candidate for such a specific type of self-help therapy. Because instead of finding that sense of peace and understanding of oneself that many people are searching for when they are using hallucinogens in this type of way, Brandon found himself angry and agitated and found himself having violent thoughts and fantasies, and he started to fixate on his mother. He was mad at his mother. He had tension towards his mother, and then he started thinking about how he would very much like to kill his own mother. Now, why the resentment was just at his mother and not at both of his parents, I can't say. It does seem like us moms tend to get the bad end of the stick or whatever when it comes to boys who grew up wanting to kill their parents. It does seem like they tend to fixate on their mom. But when it came to him specifically, it seemed that he was angry at her because of the divorce, that he thought it was her fault because shortly after her parents got divorced, His parents got divorced, rather. His mom started dating, and not just dating anybody, she started dating a wrestling coach at his school. Which maybe don't. I'll say that. Maybe we don't. I don't think it's, that's why he went on to do what he did. But like, that's just like overall just not like a good idea, in my opinion. But, live your life, I guess. Now, lucky for Brandon's mom, but unlucky for many others, obviously. Once Brandon graduated high school, he decided he was going to dip. He was like, I'm an adult. I don't have to deal with this, so I'm just going to go. But the thing is, with him, he wasn't really in a position to take care of himself yet. He wasn't like a responsible and mature adult who could have like a functional life. That just wasn't his journey. And he had plans to go off to college, but now he had no interest in that. He wasn't going to go to college. There were no like job prospects in sight. So basically he just like floated around and didn't have anywhere to live for a while. He bounced around from place to place, and not even just city to city. He bounced around from state to state, which is crazy. Like, you would think, how does one afford to do something like that when they don't have a job? But it turns out that he was able to get some money to fund this lifestyle because I guess he had been in a car accident, and it was a serious one. He ended up being tossed through a windshield and suffered from a head injury. And because of this, he had won some money. And I believe he won like $25,000, or was awarded, rather. It's not like a win. You still like cracked your head open, but he was awarded $25,000 for this, which is a good chunk of money for sure. But like, it's not going to last you forever. So here's Brandon. He's got his little nest egg of money. He's bouncing around from city to city, to state. He's doing hallucinogens, and he ends up starting to get in trouble with the law. He gets in trouble for drugs. He gets arrested. And all of that is not great, but it would go on to get worse because now we know that he's going to end up being arrested for murder here. And right now, at this point, he's been arrested for assaulting this woman who's it's 6:30 in the morning, bro. Like, leave her alone. Leave everyone alone always. So Brandon, as I said, he's arrested for the attack on Maria, and he very quickly admits to this. He has no problem confessing to what he did. But then he goes on to tell police that attacking Maria wasn't the only thing he did. He told police that the knife he had used to attack Maria is the same one he had just used to murder a 9-year-old in Oceanside, California, named Matthew Cecchi. So he was sent back to Oceanside, California, where he was questioned by police there. And once he was questioned by police there, he gave them some more insight into his brain and what happened. He said that prior to the murder, he had been camping on another beach in another area, and he had been doing a bunch of LSD. And while in that mindset, he decided that night, it was time. It was time for him to start acting out on some dark fantasies that he had been feeling for quite some time. He told the cops that he had been wanting to kill somebody for a while. There was nobody specific in mind besides his mom, we know, but that he just wanted to kill somebody. And that specifically, he wanted to kill somebody with a knife because he wanted to know what it felt like to kill somebody up close. And he wanted to know what it felt like to have somebody else's blood on his body. He told the cops that since he had decided that the time was nigh, that now he was going to start acting out on these dark fantasies, he was going to just kill over and over until he got caught. He wanted to have a murder spree. And this murder spree started with 9-year-old Matthew Cecchi. So he made his way to Oceanside, California, and this was a place he knew of because he had previously camped here. And it was a place that he felt would be sufficient for his needs because it was big enough and it was busy enough that he felt like he could do what he needed to do and then just slip away and nobody would be able to find him. So he gets to Oceanside and he gets himself a motel room. Once in his motel room, he took some more LSD and then he left and he went down to the beach looking for a victim. He was looking for somebody to kill. Now, Matthew was not his first choice. When he was first walking along the beach, he actually came upon 2 women. And though only one of the 2 women were his type, the other one he found to be completely unattractive, he still decided that these were the ones he was going to attack because what he wanted to do was try to assault and murder the one that he did find attractive. And by assault, you know what I mean. The way a man sometimes assaults a woman. I'm not saying only men assault women, but you know what I'm saying. You know exactly what I'm saying. YouTube. Now, in the end, he ended up passing up on these women because, quote, when you offer a sacrifice, it's supposed to be a lamb, pure without blemish. And these women, he believed, were not pure enough to be his sacrifices. And when we start talking about his confession in full, which we're getting to shortly, I will explain more about that. But anyways, he's frustrated. He wanted these women and now he wasn't going to have them. And so he's walking along the beach. He's frustrated. And that's when he comes upon a playground where a bunch of kids were outside playing. And one of these kids was Matthew. Now, Matthew wasn't the one he initially singled out. He didn't single out any of them from what I know. He just kind of stood by the playground and waited and watched and waited for an opportunity for one of these sweet, innocent, vulnerable kids to break away from the pact. And while he was standing there, he heard Matthew say that he needed to go to the bathroom and saw him walk off alone with his aunt. And he thought to himself, this is the one. This is who I'm going to kill. Brandon said that he hid the knife in the pocket of the jacket that he was wearing, and then he walked into the bathroom where he saw that Matthew was using the urinal. Now, Matthew, he heard somebody come in, so he kind of turned to see who was in the bathroom with him. And when he looked at Brandon, Brandon smiled at him. And he smiled at him because he didn't want Matthew to suspect anything. He wanted him to feel like he was safe. So after Matthew smiled back at him, he turned back to the wall and continued going to the bathroom. And that's when Brandon attacked him. He said that he walked up behind Matthew. He grabbed his head from behind and pulled his head back to expose his neck, and then stuck the knife in the left side of his neck and drug it across to the right. And it was so deep that it cut his jugular vein, his carotid artery, and even his larynx. Now, after telling cops this story, he literally proceeded to get up and pantomime this act to the detectives who were questioning him. He literally got up, went behind this officer, and put his hand on the guy's forehead and pulled his head back so his neck would be exposed, and then showed how he, did that, and then showed that he kept his hand here and put his hand on Matthew's chest to hold him like this so that he would bleed out while he was holding him. And he said that while he did that, there were because of the arteries and the veins, there were spurts of blood just coming out onto the wall. He said that he then let him fall to the ground, and once he was on the ground, he proceeded to stab him, with the final stab being in his back. At one point, the Oceanside detectives even ended up taking Brandon back to this bathroom where he had murdered Matthew, and again had him reenact the murder. And he was just as erratic and agitated in the recounting, and he often laughed when describing what he did. He laughed when he described this poor baby trying to talk, trying to scream, but being unable to because his throat was cut. But back to the confession. Brandon said that after killing Matthew, he just kind of stood over his body for a second, trying to figure out what he wanted to do next, because this was a very big moment for him, right? This is something he had planned to do for such a long time. And he said when he had previously thought about killing people, he had thought that he was going to want to drink their blood. This is something that he was very interested in. But in the moment standing before Matthew, that idea didn't present itself to him in his mind, okay? But he knew he wanted to take something. And I looked high and low, and I couldn't figure out if he did end up taking a trophy or not. So if you know about this case and you have any insider information, please let us know, because he does seem like the type that would. So I think he's the type that had he not been caught, he probably, in my opinion, would have gone on to do this more than once. He seemed way too fucking stoked about what he did. He said in that moment, though, he started thinking about Gail, because he knew that she was standing right outside the door, and he thought this was Matthew's mother. And so he's thinking about Gail, and he's thinking about maybe hurting her. He's thinking about going out to her or waiting for her to come inside. But he couldn't really get his thoughts straight because of the drugs he was on. So he's getting very energetic and agitated. Even in the interview, you can see this, that reliving this makes him very energetic and agitated are the best words I can come up with. Animated, excited, erratic. Erratic is a great one, because that is agitated, energetic, and what was the other one? Erratic. He was erratic. He just said in that moment he had all of this energy coursing through his body. And he said that ultimately he decided to just run out of the bathroom. And in his mind when he did, Gail stared at him. He said that she looked at him with these huge, happy and excited eyes. And he just saw him like this because of the LSD he was on. But instead of killing her, which is what he was initially planning to do, he just ran away. He said that he was lost and disoriented, and eventually ended up at the beach with a group of young people that he didn't know that were just gathered there around a fire. And after he saw what he thought was a cop car coming, he decided he wanted to blend in. After a while of sitting with these people, once he thought the coast was clear, he ended up leaving. He left the beach. He went back to his hotel room, and that's where he washed the blood off of his hands and his clothes and cleaned the knife. The next morning he woke up and he shaved his head to change his appearance, and then he decided he was going to leave Oceanside and head to Los Angeles so that he can continue his murder spree. And once he arrived in Los Angeles, he jumped on, was it a bus or was it a cab? It was a cab. He took a cab to Hollywood because he said he wanted his next murder to, quote, be among the beautiful people. And that's when he encountered Maria. And he said of this attack on Maria, quote, the part of me that was opened up had a voracious appetite. I couldn't go more than a few days without killing again. During this interview, he did go on to give more insight into his head, and this is the moment when police learned that he had been having these dark thoughts and fantasies for quite some time. This is where they learned that he wanted to kill his mother. He said when he was just 16 years old, he remembered that he would often sit in his room, he would listen to Marilyn Manson, he would start reading Nietzsche the philosopher while holding a knife. And while his mom was in the kitchen one day, he said that in that moment he considered just going out there and killing her, but he didn't. And he said he ultimately regretted that. He regretted not killing his mother. And then he said, quote, it is what we're bred into. It's what we see on television and in the movies. And he was talking about murder. He definitely seemed to be a little bit off his rocker for sure. I'm not going to lie, like he did. But to the point that he was legally not responsible, that's, we'll see. You'll let me know what you think there. But like, he definitely did believe in a Y2K-ish situation at this time in his life. Not so much that like the computers were going to come to life and like murder everybody like in that movie that came out, what was it, like last year or whatever, but definitely in the sense that he thought that when the calendars rolled over to the next year, 2000, that everybody was going to die. He also believed that he was the devil. That he was evil. That he was evil, that he was the devil specifically, but then also believed that he was a martyr chosen by God. So a very important dude was sitting in front of these officers, I will tell you that now. He said that he was the lion and everybody else was the lamb, to which I say, okay, Colin Hanks with season 6 of Dexter, how about we calm the F down, okay? But anyways, Brandon Wilson, as I'm sure you can imagine based on his confession, he was arrested and he was charged with first-degree murder with special circumstances of lying in wait, a calculated ambush, and using a deadly weapon, which made him eligible for the death penalty. And he was held without bond. And after he was arrested, the police started to, the investigators started to look into him in connection with other murder cases because they didn't feel like this could be his first one just because of how brutal it was. But this was a serious undertaking to try to connect him to other murders because this guy had bounced around from state to state. So they started tracking him and looking into other cases in other states that he could be linked to. They circulated his photo to other police departments in other states to see if he fit the description of any suspects that they may have been looking for, unidentified suspects, because again, they didn't think that it was likely that his rampage had just started there. So they were looking at him and they were looking specifically to see if he was linked to any murders of any children, which, does make sense because that is his victim profile. But ultimately they looked at him in relation to a couple of different cases and they weren't able to link him to any other murder case. And he never confessed to any other murders either. Now, when Brandon first went to court, his very first appearance, the courtroom was packed with everybody, with family, with friends, with everybody, with everybody but Matthew's parents. They actually did not attend this. And during this hearing, Brandon ended up shocking everybody by just straight up yelling, not yelling, but exclaiming, I did it. And not even at the time where he was supposed to speak, he just had to get it out of him, it seemed. And he said, quote, I did it. I'm guilty. I want to talk myself. I did it. I killed him. I killed that little boy. And bro, as soon as he said this, his attorney was like, I would like my client removed from this courtroom, please, because he's just running his mouth. And the judge was like, no, he's going to stay. And so the attorney turns to him and is like, bro, not legit verbatim. He said, bro, why don't you shut the fuck up? Because this is not helpful. Not verbatim, though. That's just me being a silly little jokester. He was just like, guy, you got to be quiet. This is not good. You're not helping me help you. Help me help you, friend. Now, as I said, Matthew's parents were not here at this hearing, but they did see what happened. They saw this spontaneous confession, and they did wonder to themselves why he did it. But they came to the conclusion that they believed that he was doing this to try to secure an insanity defense later down the line, which was something that was very, very upsetting for Matthew's family, because his father said, I don't believe this kid's insane. I believe that he is evil and he's just trying to skirt responsibility. And then just said, why don't we just quickly take him to the electric chair and get this over with? And you know what? It seems that what Matthew's family thought, and really what most people thought that the defense was trying to do and that Brandon was trying to do when he had that outburst, was to get an insanity defense. And this became evident that it was true when the day after this outburst, his attorney announced that they were going to be giving him a psychological evaluation. I guess after his spontaneous confession, he did seem agitated and he felt like he made a mistake. And I didn't mention this, but during the hearing, he also tried to claim that he didn't need an attorney. But now he was saying that he did, obviously, and he was so upset after doing this that he had to be sedated. So obviously, after all of that, his attorneys are going to want to evaluate him. Now, even though he initially pled not guilty by reason of insanity, even though he did sit there and, express in court that he did do it, and then proceeded to be like a smirking little dick through the proceedings, he ended up entering a second plea, which I did not know you could do. And he pled guilty. So he pled guilty, but then at the same time, he was also pleading not guilty by reason of insanity, which is not something that I knew you were able to do. It does make sense because, like you're saying, I did it, but I wasn't in the right state of mind when I did do it. But I don't think I've ever seen you be able to enter two pleas. I can't think of another case where that had been the case that I have covered, at least. His attorney said that Brandon was not in the right mental state when he killed Matthew, and said that basically anybody who could commit a crime like this could not be in the right mental state, which on a human level, I'm like, I want to believe that. I want to believe that nobody could just like kill a kid for no reason and be in the right mental state. But at the same time, I'm like, but is it to the point that he's not legally responsible? Because then where do you draw the line? And it seems sketchy. The kid's sketchy. So basically what was going to happen here at the trial was that the defense was going to have to prove that Brandon was insane at the time that he killed Matthew. And if they were successful in doing that, then Brandon would be put into a mental health facility. And if not, he would be facing the death penalty, since that's what the prosecution was going after. So the trial began that September, and the defense laid out their defense. And their defense was that Brandon, again, was not in his right mental state at the time that he killed Matthew. They said at the time that he killed Matthew, he didn't even believe that he was doing anything wrong. He believed he was following instructions from God. He believed he was a soldier of God, and he was put on this earth to kill those with pure souls. And he said that Matthew didn't have a totally pure soul, but he was the closest that he felt like, that Matthew was the closest that Brandon felt like he was going to get. He said that he was going to kill those who were deserving of God's love, and he believed that by completing this task, he would be granted into the inner circle of love, which apparently only those who obeyed their divine commands were allowed access to. The defense told the court that Brandon had suffered from mental health issues and the delusion that he had a one-way connection to speak to God since he was a teenager, and said that these symptoms that he was already experiencing were exacerbated when he started taking LSD. And to try to prove that this was true, the defense told the court that when Brandon was a teenager, his mother had taken him to a mental health facility and to be spoken to, or to speak to somebody. And the doctor that he spoke to said that Brandon was the most angry person that he had ever encountered. Or rather, one of the angriest people they had encountered. Not the angriest, but up there. The defense did have two experts who were going to testify on their behalf, and they did testify and tried to prove that Brandon was not mentally in the right place legally when he committed this murder. One of these doctors had interviewed Brandon for 5 hours, 2 different times, and said that Brandon was insane and truly believed he was speaking to God. He even said that Brandon believed he got these messages from God over his hotel TV, and he said Brandon did not meet the criteria to be legally responsible because to him, the murder was not wrong. Instead, it was a loving sacrifice commanded by God. Now, the second expert, I won't even get into that much because this person got straight roasted on the stand because it turned out that they didn't have a lot of experience. They didn't have a lot of experience testifying in these types of cases and didn't seem to really understand what the legal criteria for insanity was, and basically got demoted to no longer being an expert witness. So the prosecution heard everything the defense said, and they responded with simply like, "No, I don't believe that that is true." And they said that basically, if you watch Brandon's confession, it is very clear how bad he wanted to kill somebody and how bad he had wanted to kill somebody for quite some time. They talked about his violent fantasies. They talked about the fact that he wanted to assault and murder these women. And they talked about the fact that he wanted to take trophies and drink blood. And they were like, I'm sorry, but which part of this points to doing a mission from God? Anybody? Is God in the room with us? The prosecution said that Brandon was smart, manipulative, and totally capable of trying to fake a mental illness to get away with the murder he committed. The prosecution then said that Brandon got straight A's in high school, scored in the 98th percentile in college admission tests, and was admitted to the University of Wisconsin before deciding instead he was just going to throw it all away and travel the country. During his travels, Brandon also was a writer, and he wrote a story called, quote, The Oracle. And this included a battle between mythological style creatures, which is interesting considering the reason he had for murdering, according to him, was to do, or had to do with, a battle between good and evil. And he was writing about a battle whilst on his journeys. During the trial, the prosecution also said to Brandon, quote, You were a fan of Nietzsche in high school, weren't you? He then went on to mention Nietzsche's Superman theory, which I'm not super familiar with. It sounds, and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds a little racist, but it's a theory about rare individuals whose intellect and discipline set them apart and make them stronger and better than everybody else, essentially, from what I read. Which again, seems racist, but also seems on brand for what this guy's going through. I don't know if he's racist, but good and evil, wanting to triumph over people, wanting to be smarter and stronger and better. That all is on brand for him. The prosecution also had their own expert witness, a doctor who testified that Brandon was not insane at the time that he killed Matthew. He was instead an angry sadist who used drugs to lower his inhibitions and make him feel comfortable doing the things he always wanted to do all along. The doctor said that Brandon only came up with the story of a divine mission after getting caught, and said that his excitement when recounting the murder and confessing proved that. The doctor basically said that this wasn't a mental illness, this was a personality disorder. They said that Brandon was a troubled man whose resentment towards his parents fueled his violent tendencies. They said all his actions proved he knew right from wrong and chose wrong because it's what he wanted. He tried not to get caught by running away, by going and hiding with those people in the fire circle, by going back to his hotel, by washing the blood off and running away to another place. He knew what he was doing was wrong, and that's why he was trying to hide and cover it up. And on top of that, he said that he would rather die than spend the rest of his life in prison. The prosecution said he was very well of his actions. He wanted to do this for a while, and he was very, very manipulative. I mean, he literally went into that bathroom and he manipulated Matthew by smiling at him to make him feel like he was safe. The prosecution said that Brandon was a predator waiting for his young prey to break away from the pack so that they would be vulnerable and available to him. And he liked it. He liked the killing, and he liked the idea of the notoriety he would get from committing this murder. And they had evidence of that. When he was being transported from Hollywood back to Oceanside, California, he was in the car with these officers. And one of the officers, while they were talking to him, mentioned how notorious he would be for committing this murder. And they said that Brandon was beaming at the idea. Now, Brandon did take the stand. And when he did, he tried to explain himself when he said, quote, I realized there was a part of myself that was evil, and God put it there, and he had done it for a reason. He told the court that he had received a surge of energy after he killed Matthew, and he felt like this was God's way of letting him know that he had done the right thing. He said that he would do it again, and that he said that he also wanted to teach like-minded people to be like him. He said that he wanted people to stop being afraid and to just kill because that's what God wanted. And he said that it was his job to bring this out in people. And bro, when he's saying this in court, he's smiling. Now, the defense closed by saying that the way in which Brandon says these horrible things so bluntly and matter-of-factly proves his psychosis. The prosecution, though, closed by saying that the defect is not in Brandon's mind, but instead it's in his heart. So with that, the jury was sent to deliberate, and they were going to be deciding whether or not they thought that this insanity defense that was presented had any merit. And it didn't take them long to come back with their decision. And when they did, they had rejected the insanity defense, which meant that Brandon Wilson was found guilty for the murder of 9-year-old Matthew Cecchi. So now it was just about whether or not he was going to get the death penalty, because that's what the prosecution wanted. Now, Brandon's attorneys did their best to try and get Brandon life in prison instead of the death penalty. They asked former teachers and a psychiatrist to tell jurors why Brandon should receive life imprisonment without parole rather than execution. And the psychiatrist for the defense said of Brandon, quote, "Here is somebody who is significantly, seriously mentally ill and most likely needs hospital care and forced medication." He added that Brandon was a manic depressive who suffered from a personality disorder that included narcissism, schizophrenia, and delusional behavior. During the sentencing phase, people who cared about Matthew were able to give their victim impact statements, and these are always very difficult to read. But you must, because those who are left behind and have to deal with the aftermath of murders like this are incredibly important, and it's something that needs to be highlighted more. So one of the people who gave a victim impact statement was actually one of Matthew's teachers. Matthew's teacher. He didn't have multiple teachers. He was a third grader. I think I said second grader before. He was a third grader. And she went on the stand and she talked about how difficult it was to have to tell her class of third graders that she couldn't answer their question. And their question was, why was their friend murdered? And when this woman testified, two of the male jurors, cried. Several of Matthew's family members also testified, several of which had been at the beach that day, one of which was his uncle, who said that when Matthew died, nothing made sense and it just felt like a bomb went off. Sharon, Matthew's mother, testified, and she told the court about finding her beautiful baby dead on that dirty beach bathroom floor, and talked about her final moments with him, about trying to hold him and trying to comfort him and rub his hair and tell him that she loved him. And she talked about his little brother, who was 4 now, who often wore his big brother's shirts so that he could feel closer to him. And she said that her son was her entire world. He was her special boy. She also said that since Matt's murder, her and her husband went on to get divorced. They couldn't stay together after this, which you see a lot. I guess Lewis had a really difficult time with the fact that this happened when he wasn't there and couldn't get over the feeling that his wife and her family should have been watching Matthew more closely when he was in their care. And she talked about just how broken her other son was because he's so little. He was 3 when this happened. She couldn't explain what really happened to him. He just knew that one day his brother was there and the next he was gone. And this poor woman said of losing her first son, quote, "Life is incomplete now. I miss him terribly. I want him to be alive. I want to hold him, to hug him, to kiss him." She was all for Brandon getting the death penalty, which is valid for her. And in a very angry statement to the court, she said, quote, "Brandon Wilson wanted to kill for the thrill of it. He wanted to know what it felt like to look someone in the eyes and see death. Well, he should get what he wants. Let him see what the face of a dying person looks like every morning and every evening, except let the face he looks at be his own." Now, I don't believe that Matthew's father, Lewis, was there, but he did have a family friend read a statement on his behalf where he talked about how Brandon destroyed his family and how he talked about how he had turned into a robot after dealing with cancer and murder and divorce all in 1 year because of this man. He's 20. I was going to say boy, but he's a man. And in this letter, Lewis said specifically, and I quote, "Let's be clear about one thing. This was not an act of God. This was not the work of God. This was Satan's work, and he made a fool of you. I hope and pray that God has no mercy on your soul, your pathetic soul, for what you did to that little boy. I hope and pray that you rot in hell for eternity." And at the end, Brandon took the stand himself. And bro, this is the clip. This is the clip I saw that made me want to look into this case, because I didn't get referred this case. I stumbled upon this case while researching another case, which really is a tale as old as time with me. I think it's when I was researching the Bruce Miller case. I could be wrong. But he gets on the stand and he says, and I quote, "First of all, I'd like to say I feel no remorse whatsoever for what I've done." That's a strong start. That's a fucked up start. How does one even say that after doing what he did? But he continues, "I would do it again in a second if I had the chance. I have explained to you my position here. My whole purpose in life is to help destroy your society. You people are here as representatives of that society, and as such, you should do everything in your power to rid the world of me and execute me. And man, this was something that was so difficult for Matthew's family to hear. Like his grandfather said that it disgusted him to hear. Now, in closing arguments for the sentencing hearing, Brandon's attorney said that Brandon's mind did not function in a way that let him know the difference between right and wrong. He specifically said of this quote, "We reserve death in this society for the worst of the worst, those of whom there is no possibility of redemption. Can you say that of Brandon Wilson? I don't think you can." I don't know. Kind of feels like you can. What do you think? Let me know. Kind of feels like you can. Now, as far as the prosecution, they said that the death penalty seemed perfect for Brandon because he was the type of man who liked to go out and hunt women and children. The prosecutor then went on to describe how agonizing and painful Matthew's final moments would be because they determined that it would have taken 10 seconds for him to go unconscious after his throat was cut, which meant that the last thing he was seeing, and this was a quote that I read, I don't have the exact quote, but basically it said that the last thing he was seeing was himself die because he was just seeing the blood hit the wall out of his neck with every of his heartbeats. And his family had to know this. And it's just very upsetting. So the jury was sent to deliberate, and they were going to be deliberating about what Brandon's sentence should be. And during this deliberation, they asked to rewatch his confession tape. And I believe it was 5 hours. They came back after 5 hours, and when they did, they had their decision. And they decided that Brandon Wilson should indeed get the death penalty. They said if any case deserved the death penalty, this was it. And this is one of those things, I've discussed this from time to time. I haven't really talked about how I feel about the death penalty because my opinion changes often. But if we do live in a world where the death penalty exists for these types of cases, for murder cases, then what case would be fitting if not this one? You know what I mean? Like, what case would be fitting if not for a man who would violently murder a child for no reason and have no remorse afterwards? Like I can't, there's, it's one of the worst things I've ever heard of. Now, Brandon's mother was present during this hearing, but she didn't testify. She didn't talk at all. I guess Brandon requested that she not testify on his behalf, and his father was pretty much checked out. Like, he was there for a time, but then the day that they showed the reenactment of the murder, his dad stopped coming and didn't come back. The most we really got from Brandon's family was a statement that his uncle read at one point, and his uncle had said, what did he say? He basically just said that he hoped that his condolences, that the family's condolences were with Matthew's family, and that he hoped that they would accept that. Because, it's not their fault that Brandon went on to turn into such a monster. But I know that it's a common theme to blame parents when something goes so wrong, which, I mean, when you lose your kid in such a horrible way, I think almost any way that you feel and almost any way that you want to blame is valid, because what the fuck? How do you deal with that? But anyways, the jury recommended the death penalty, and the judge agreed. They said that Brandon had, quote, damaged this community's faith in humanity and called the murder heinous and vicious. And the judge said specifically, quote, Mr. Wilson, you have made real every parent's nightmare. By your twisted and selfish actions, you have taken from us our most precious asset. That is our children. And then the judge said that Brandon was beyond salvation. And you know what's crazy that I think really shows how dark Brandon was and how difficult he must have been to deal with is that after finishing this case, his defense attorney decided and announced that he was leaving his profession altogether because of the emotional toll that defending Brandon had been. He said specifically of this quote, prosecutors can shield themselves with righteousness, but defense attorneys bear the grief of both sides, and that is extremely difficult. And I guess this guy had been an attorney for a long time and just decided that he was done. So Brandon was on death row, and typically those on death row have a very long and grueling inch towards death. It takes a very long time for anybody to get executed. And honestly, like, people are like, oh, you want the death penalty. But usually, in a lot of cases that I've seen, prisoners who are on death row have a better time in prison than those who are not on death row. But for Brandon, it was going to be different, because on the morning of November 17th, 2011, Brandon Wilson was found dead in his prison cell. which is crazy. That right there just shows you how long it takes, because he was convicted in what, 1991, and he was found dead in a cell in 2011. So that was like 20 years. I don't think I said this out loud, but he was found dead in a cell. He was found dead in his cell because he had ended his own existence. He was 33 years old. And when he did this, he was, I believe it was the 19th prisoner who had done this to themselves since the death penalty was reinstated in 1978, which actually meant that more prisoners died by ending their own existence than actually being executed since the death penalty was reinstated, which is crazy. Now, the time that it took for this to happen, like that 20 years, was incredibly upsetting for Matthew's family, because whether you agree with the death penalty or not, it exists and he was given it. And Matthew's family, like many others, have to sit there and deal with this prolonged process of like appeals and extensions and just sitting there waiting for this person who you want to no longer exist to no longer exist. And his family said that the time that it took just felt like a slap in the face. Now, by the time Brandon died, Matthew's father had already passed away, because remember that he had cancer, and the rest of the family had mixed reactions on how they felt in learning that Brandon was gone. There was shock, but there was also, a sense of justice. Now, Matthew's grandparents, they learned about Brandon taking his life on the TV. I don't know why the family isn't like informed of this, but I don't really know how that system works, but they heard about it in the TV. And later they gave an interview where Matthew's grandpa, his name was Lou, I believe Lewis was named for his father. If I would guess, that would be correct, but I could be wrong. But that's what I think. And he said of this quote, "I was shocked. We're shocked, but happy he's gone. At least that's the way I feel. He's been on death row a long time." And they added that they're just glad that this chapter of their life has finally come to a close. They're glad that this person who ruined their lives and took away somebody so important to them finally no longer exists, and they're ready to just try to move on with their lives, put the bad memories of everything related to Brandon Wilson behind them, and just hold on to the good memories of their beloved grandson. And with that, my friends, is the story of the murder of 9-year-old Matthew Cecchi. I hope that it was informative. I hope I gave you all the information you would want when looking into this case. And of course, I just want to thank you for hanging out and remembering Matthew with me today. Now, considering everything I told you throughout this video, I want to revisit the question of the day, and that was this. Do you believe that Brandon Wilson was mentally ill to the point that he should not have been found legally responsible, or do you think he deserved the death penalty? Or alternatively, do you believe that he was not legally responsible, or that he was legally responsible and shouldn't have had the death penalty? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. I'm curious to hear what you have to say. Before you leave, please don't forget to leave me a comment down below with whatever case you'd like to see me cover in the future. As you know, I have a long list of cases, and whenever you leave me a suggestion, I put it on my list with your name next to it, so if I do cover it, I can give you a shout out. I love looking into the cases you guys suggest, because they're often cases I haven't heard of, and cases that need more coverage, and I know you're filled with great ideas and great taste, otherwise you would not be here. If you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 weeks, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us. And if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is listed down below, along with a link to my membership and a link to my merch store. Merch store. Oh, if you didn't already know, what you're seeing with your eyes, what you're hearing with your ears is also a podcast. It's called True Crime with Bratterstein. So if you want, no pressure, if you want to go give it a listen, give it a download, I am trying to get into the algorithm and push myself out there. But if you don't want to, I also understand. I just want to thank you for being here. And now, with all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. I hope to see you in my next video. And in the meantime, take care of yourself.